Hey everybody, Amy here with Garden Up Landscape. Today I'm going to be pruning a grapevine. So I have all the tools I need. The main thing is going to be hand pruners. Again, bypass hand pruners. I do not use anvil pruners for anything. These cut like scissors. The cutting blade crosses the crushing blade instead of just coming up and crushing the plant material against it. And it makes a good clean cut. Just in case I have anything bigger to cut, I also have loppers and a saw. Actually, I have two sizes of saws. I don't think I'll need either of them today, but I have them just in case. If you need to train your grape, you're going to want something to tie it with, so either twine or a Darden twist tie. And then for the final cleanup, I have my expandable rake and my shuffle hoe for the weeds underneath. Some things to know about grapes. You have several different growth habits of plants, like annual and perennial and biennial. An annual is a plant that dies every winter and you have to replant it completely. Sometimes the plant reseeds itself, so it does come back, but from a new plant, from a seed, not the original plant. The original plant died. That's an annual. A perennial is a plant that comes back every year, year after year, forever until something happens that eventually dies. So that often the top might die back, but the root stays and it will continue to come back year after year. And then you have biennials. And biennials are plants with a 2-year life cycle. So they might grow a rosette of leaves 1 year and then bolt a big tall shoot of flowers or something the next year. Examples of that are things like foxglove. There's also weeds that are biennial, like common mullein. Grapes, and also raspberries, but today's about grapes. Grapes have a perennial root with a biennial branch. So the root and the trunk and everything will come back year after year after year, but the branches themselves will grow 1 year and then flower and fruit the next year. And then often they will die back after that. Sometimes you'll get flowers and fruits on the same branch for many years before they die, but most of the time you'll get better fruit off of that 1-year-old branch. The reason it's important to know that grapes are a perennial in the roots and a biennial on the top is because if you cut off this year's growth, then next year that branch isn't going to be there to give you fruit. Therefore, if you cut off all of the branches on a grape, you'll get green this year, but you will not get fruit. And so if you're expecting fruit this year and you cut everything off, you're going to be really disappointed. You'll get stuff next year, but not this year. And that's why it's important to remember the biennial cane and the 2-year life cycle. So, with grapes, what we like to do is cut off all of the old last year's fruited dying branches. And if that doesn't happen, if that doesn't get done, then the grape overgrows and it turns into this big woody mass, and it's just a big mess. When I first came to this grapevine here with this particular client, it had been at least 20 years since it had ever been pruned, and it was this huge mess. So this is 3 years later. I've got it pretty well under control at this point. But there are quite a few branches that I'm ready to take out. So that's what I'm going to do today. I want you to see up close what I'm looking at. This is a branch that grew last year. It's got a nice healthy bud on it. Today is May 5th. It's the beginning of May, and it's just starting to show where it's going to bud. Just starting to show those new buds. It's also got some stuff from last year. But you can also see which branches are not going to grow. They're kind of gray, they're wrinkly, the bark is dying. If I were to take my pruners and slice off some of this bark, you'll see that there's no wick there. There's no cadmium layer. It just goes straight from bark to inner wood. Whereas if I were to do that on a living branch, but there's green living tissue inside there. Oh, and look at that. That's even expelling juices. That's an okay place to cut. Probably would have been better to leave one more joint on that one. But like this one here, this is the last point of living growth before you have this dead shoot, so I can just take that down like that, and it's all brown. So that's what I'm looking to cut off, is all of this dead stuff from last year. And I'm going to go in and take off a couple more older branches, probably. It's quite a lot of work to do in here, but not nearly as much as the first year I did it. A few other things to know about grapes. If you're in a vineyard, then those grapes were planted and then grown and then trained along wires. They usually have 2 wires, one on top of the other, and they plant the grape, it grows up, and they grow out in both directions. They only want 4 vines, 1 for each wire. They're trained along that wire, and then they let 4 more vines grow from the main central trunk, and they cut off everything else. They only want 4, and the reason for that is those 4 become very healthy and vigorous. Most home gardeners don't go that far. They usually just let their grapes kind of do what their grapes want to do, and that's fine. You're going to get more fruit. It might just not quite be the same quality as a grape vineyard, but that's the reason that's the proper way of taking care of grapes. What I like to do is just kind of let them do what they want to do, you know. But in a vineyard, that's why they're grown that way. Along those wires is for efficiency, it's easy to pick, and also for quality of fruit. So they'll let those 4 vines grow, they'll train them along the wire, they'll let them flower, they'll harvest the fruit. Meanwhile, they've got 4 other vines growing off that they let trail along the ground. The next spring, they take off the vines from the previous year, they train the new ones onto the wire, and then those are the ones that fruit and flower that year. Meanwhile, they've got 2 more vines, or 4 more vines, growing along the ground, and the process repeats year after year after year. So, on this grape, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And at first, I'm going to move pretty slowly, just cutting off all these little ends, so that I can get into the plant and see what I'm actually trying to do. I might have to make several cuts, so I'm going to follow this dead one up quite a ways, but it's woven in and through all the other vines, all the way back there until I found a live part. I prefer to make every cut at a node, just like every other plant that I cut. I try to make it a correct cut. This one's alive, so I'm going to try to leave that. So this is just going to continue for quite some time. Another thing you can do to grapes, if they're really, really overgrown, you can actually cut them at the ground and just completely restart them from the bottom. I'm not quite that brave, and we didn't want to do that with these because they've been so well trained along the wires for so many years. But it is an option. If you have a grape that's just not very vigorous anymore, you can cut it right to the ground level or right back to the central trunk or whatever. Don't be afraid to do that. They usually grow back. And if they're not healthy enough to grow back from that, they probably weren't going to survive anyway. Never seen the sap run like this. This is pretty crazy. So another thing I want to not do is have the branches all the way out into the lawn where they are in the way of the lawn mower. So some of these branches that are still alive and healthy but sticking out in this direction, I'm going to prune back just to keep the whole thing under control. There are plenty of branches for the grape production. And this one's all dead. There it is. We cut it back to there. Still dead. Follow it back farther. That's as far as I can get on that one for now. So that's why we do always correct cuts. So as long as we do a correct cut, we don't have to worry about tracking it down and finding it. So take each one. What I mean by a correct cut is each one I'm taking back to a node. That's a growth point. Well, that one's dead, so I'm going to keep going. That one's still dead, keep going. Still dead, still dead, still dead, etc. Maybe that one. Nope, still dead, kind of some life. I might leave that one there, actually. That's what I mean by each cut should be a correct cut. I mentioned already about how vineyards grow only 4 vines off of each plant because they want the best quality grapes. And there's arguments that they get the most quantity too. But the type of pruning you're going to do on your grapes depends on your end goal. If you're a vineyard, you want quality over quantity. So you want the plant to put all of its energy into a few clusters of excellent grapes. But if you're just a homeowner who just wants to use the grapes for table eating or making jams and jellies and canning it, then you might want quantity over quality, in which case you want as many vines as you can get, and then just keep your plant as healthy as possible. Both schools of thought on that. Do whatever feels right to you, and as you get to know your grape, you'll get to know what it wants and where it wants to be pruned, and you can come to agreements with it as far as what goes and what stays. No, you're not allowed to grow this way. That's where the lawn is. You can't go that way. Keep going back. It'll tell you what it wants to take off. This one, it keeps telling me it wants to. I keep leaving it because it's alive, but it's just hanging here. It's not really doing any good. It's not really alive until all the way back there. And so we just keep moving around. Some vines might take you back and forth all over the place, following them to make sure that you cut them in the right place. And you don't lose one in the labyrinth of sticks. But for the most part, you just start on one end and work your way down. You do want to make sure all the old grapes from last year are taken out because there is some little bit of mold That's often botrytis, which is a really nasty thing you don't want on your grapes. So you want to make sure that the vines are left are good and clean. This one has been cut in pretty much the same place for several years. It's got lots of buds on the same spot, and it's going to turn into a big gnarl if I leave it there. So I think I'm actually going to take this one back a little farther this year. And I'm looking for a good strong bud. A node is acceptable if you can't find a strong bud, but these branches are so long, I'm quite sure I'll find one eventually. This one's going to shoot straight out into the yard, so I might train it back, I might prune it back, not sure yet. I'll decide that in a little bit. Another thing you don't want to leave is stubs. I'm not sure when those were made. We're going to cut them off now. You're going to uncover all kinds of different things every year that you didn't think were there before. Like I said, I've been taking care of this grape for about 4 years now. Last year was the first year we really got it to where we wanted it. Now it's just maintaining it in that manner. That one looks dead here, but I wasn't sure about here, so I took off some of the bark to see, and yeah, it's definitely dead. So I'm going to try to take it out. I want to open up this part of the plant so that airflow can get in there. And having dead branches just piled on top of themselves does not do the plant any good. When you get into the really old branches, it's hard to tell what's alive and what's not because of the exfoliating bark. But there is a bud right here. This one's alive. This one crosses back and goes this way and attaches to a branch that I left, so it's alive. This is dead right up to this point, crosses all the way, goes all over the place. This point where it connects, that one is alive. But I'm going to cut off the dead stub because I don't want that there. Again, you don't want stubs on grapes for the same reason you don't want stubs on trees or any other plants. The tree can't ever heal the wound, it can only seal it, or in this case vine. It can't heal a wound, it can only seal the wound. And if you leave a stub, it just leaves it open for disease and all kinds of other rot and gross things to get in. You just don't want your plant to be exposed to that kind of pathogens and problems. So on a grape like this, where you're approaching an established grape that's well overgrown and you're trying to rejuvenate it back to its former glory, you're gonna find more and more dead stuff every year that you missed the previous years, and that's okay. But that's where you assess if it's worth it to just cut the whole thing off at the bottom. It's sometimes much faster than that. So we have a few really old branches in here that are really dead. I'm just going to take them out in pieces. This is stuff that must have died since last year or just was uncovered because of the pruning last year and this year. Last thing I want to note is just how important it is to make sure it's all cleaned up underneath, because the stuff that's under here, the old fruit from previous years and the leaves and everything else, can harbor disease that can affect the plant. Bacteria and fungi can live on the old fruit or in the old leaves and overwinter there, and then when the new growth comes in, the rain hits it, the spores splatter up, and it lands on the new growth of the plant and affects it all over again. So we're getting everything cleaned up here. There's the final grape. A lot of it still looks pretty dead, but it's actually surprising how much of this is still alive. With some practice, you'll get to the point where you can tell by feeling it what's dead and what's not. The stuff that's dead is a lot more brittle and dry feeling. And then at the same time, there are branches that look completely dead. The bark is completely exfoliated off, it's all exposed, and yet if you follow it up, you'll find buds on it. Lots to know about grapes. That's it for now. See you in the next video.